Ever get stuck with that coworker who always seems to have a reason why their work isn't done?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not like they're just lazy. It's more like they're, oh,
Waiting for the system to come back online.
exactly. Or there's some family emergency. Or
Right.
the point is, it's like this constant thing. And in their book, Office Epidemics, Suram calls this whole phenomenon Excusenza. Catchy, right?
It is. And what I find interesting is how Suram argues that this, goes beyond just someone being annoying.
Yeah.
It can actually have a real impact on teams.
Okay, so when I first heard the term, I thought, Excusenza, all right, that's about lazy coworkers.
Yeah.
But the book digs way deeper than that.
Yeah, it definitely challenges those initial judgments by, connecting Excusenza to things like fear of failure or even fear of confrontation and even sometimes, low self-confidence.
So you're saying there's a whole psychological component to this?
Absolutely. And I think that's where it gets really interesting because suddenly that coworker who's always double booked becomes a little more understandable.
Okay, so I'm seeing the empathy here. But Suram doesn't let anyone off the hook completely, right?
Right.
It's not just about understanding why someone might be excuse-prone. It's about what that actually does to the team around them.
100%. The impact is really what matters here.
Yeah.
And to really drive that point home, Suram introduces us to this character in the book, Samir. They call him the dodging chameleon.
Oh, Samir. Okay, yeah. This is where the book got really, really interesting for me. Because who hasn't worked with a Samir?
Exactly. He's that master of deflection.
Yes.
And Suram uses him brilliantly to illustrate how, one seemingly small excuse can actually set off this whole chain of consequences.
It's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
Okay, so for our listeners who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Samir yet, paint us a picture. What happens when Samir's on the team?
All right. So let's say Priya, she's the team lead, asks Samir for a client report, standard stuff. It's due that day. And immediately Samir's hit with this sudden case of, oh, I've got another meeting or something came up, but I'll get it to you as soon as I can.
Classic Samir.
Right. Always a reason. And it doesn't stop there. The computer system's down.
Nope, can't do it.
Not my fault. Too much on his plate. Another classic. Waiting on someone else. Naturally.
Yeah.
You name it, Samir's got an excuse for it.
It's almost impressive in a frustrating kind of way. But what really struck me was how Suram shows what this does to Samir's colleagues. It's not just about him. It's about how Priya, Ravi, Ananya, the rest of his team, how they're impacted by this.
And I think that's the genius of using a character like Samir, right?
Yeah.
It makes it real.
Yeah.
Because we see how Ravi ends up working late to cover Samir's work, how Priya can't rely on him for anything.
Right.
And poor Ananya, who's new to the team, she's totally confused about what's actually expected of her.
It's like this constant undercurrent of tension, resentment building, just from one person's, chronic excuse making. And what really got me thinking? The book has this self-assessment.
Oh, yeah. To see if you might actually be a little bit of a Samir.
Well, Samir check. Right.
Exactly. We're not going to make you share your answers out loud or anything.
No, your secrets are safe with us.
But it does get you thinking, right? Like, are you the one making excuses?
Yeah, it's a good gut check. Like, do you often shift blame when things go wrong? Or find yourself making excuses instead of just owning up to mistakes?
Okay, so before we send everyone into an existential crisis about their own excuse habits,
Right.
let's talk solutions. Thankfully, Office Epidemics doesn't just leave us hanging. Suram introduces this really practical framework. It's called OWNIT. And I'm all about a good framework, and this one seems particularly useful.
It's a good one. It really is. Because it gives you actionable steps, instead of just making you feel bad about making excuses.
Right.
So let's break it down. What does OWNIT actually stand for? Each letter represents a step to, overcoming this Excusenza epidemic.
All right, I'm ready. Hit me with step one. Okay, so the O is for observe. You have to start by noticing those patterns of excuse making. And this could be in yourself or in others. But it's about, when does it happen? What kind of language do they use? What are the triggers?
So it's about paying attention to those little red flags, those moments.
Exactly. And then once you're aware of the pattern, that's when you can start to actually address it, hopefully constructively. Instead of getting caught up in the blame game, try to shift that focus to finding solutions. And that actually brings us to the W in OWNIT, which is work on solutions, not blame.
Okay, I like that. This is already sounding way more productive than just stewing in frustration.
Right.
So we're observing, then we're focusing on solutions. What comes next?
The N is for negotiate expectations. And this is all about making sure everyone's on the same page from the get-go.
Oh, so there's no room for any... Oh, I thought you were handling that.
Exactly. You're eliminating excuses before they even have a chance to appear.
I like it.
By clearly outlining, like, roles, responsibilities, deadlines right from the start, you're setting everyone up for success.
Love it.
And then, once those expectations are set, it becomes a lot easier to initiate accountability, which is the I in O&IT.
Ah, the I. Gotcha. Accountability, that makes sense.
And this doesn't have to be about, being confrontational. It can be as simple as just checking in regularly.
Oh.
Offering support, like, hey, just wanted to touch base on that project. How are things going on your end?
Right.
Is there anything I can do to help?
So it's about fostering that sense of responsibility without being all, like, accusatory.
Exactly. It's about support and collaboration.
Yeah.
And then finally, we have the T, teach ownership. And this is where we move from just addressing those individual instances of excuse-making to creating this whole culture of accountability and ownership.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about this culture of ownership thing.
So it's about fostering this environment where people, they take pride in their work, where they're empowered to own their mistakes, and they're encouraged to be part of the solution.
Okay.
It's about moving away from that blame game and towards, like, a more collaborative and growth-oriented mindset.
I love that. Shifting from blame to solutions. It's like you're giving people actual tools to use, not just, pointing fingers.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of tools, Suram actually gives some really specific examples of how to use this OWNIT framework in different workplace scenarios. Because we talked about Samir.
Right.
But what about Ravi, the teammate who always gets stuck picking up the slack?
Oh, poor Ravi.
Yeah.
The book actually dives into what someone like Ravi can do about a colleague like Samir.
Because, let's be real, we can't just magically change other people, right?
Right.
So how does ONI-IT work in that kind of situation?
Well, it goes back to that first step. Observe.
Okay.
Ravi, instead of just getting, increasingly frustrated,
Right.
can start to pay attention to the patterns in Samir's excuses.
Like, when is he most likely to deflect? What are those trigger points?
Because instead of getting swept up in that initial frustration, Ravi's kind of taking a step back, really paying attention.
Exactly. And that awareness can actually help Ravi, maybe anticipate Samir's moves and then respond a little bit more strategically.
Oh, okay.
So instead of directly confronting Samir,
Right.
he can start to, like, gently nudge him towards taking ownership.
Okay, so less, dude, you're always dumping your work on me. More. What? Give me an example.
Okay, so picture this. Samir hits Ravi with his classic, oh, I would have finished that report, but the system crashed and IT is so slow.
Ugh, classic Samir.
Right. But this time, Ravi, armed with his own IT toolkit, could say something like, oh, man, that's rough about the system crash. Maybe next time we could have a backup plan, in case that happens again, so we don't miss the deadline.
Oh, okay. So he's acknowledging the issue.
Right.
But also kind of subtly shifting the focus to, like, solutions and prevention.
Yes, exactly. He's working on solutions, not blame. That W from our IT. And notice how he's also kind of subtly introducing this idea of shared responsibility.
Oh, interesting.
It's not just about Samir and his, failure to get the work done. It's about the team's success.
That's really clever. It takes the heat out of the situation, but it's still, like, moving things forward.
Right.
What about, like, at the start of a project?
Oh, yeah.
How do you negotiate those expectations up front to, like, minimize those excuse loopholes in the first place?
That N, negotiating expectations, it's crucial.
Yeah.
Before even diving into a new project with someone like Samir, Ravi could say something like, hey, before we really get started, let's just make sure we're all on the same page about individual roles, deadlines, who's responsible for what.
After everyone's crystal clear about what's expected of them.
Yes. No room for, I thought you were handling that later on.
Exactly.
And once those expectations are set, it makes it much easier to initiate that accountability piece, the I of ONI-IT.
Right.
And again, it's not about micromanaging. It's about those regular check-ins.
Right. Like, hey, Samir, just wanted to see how that client report is coming along. Any roadblocks I can help you with?
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
And again, the tone is supportive, not accusatory.
Right.
It's about creating that space for, like, open communication.
Yeah, that makes sense. This OWNIT framework is like a masterclass in, like, navigating these kind of tricky office dynamics.
That's a good one.
But we've talked a lot about, like, addressing other people's excusenza, right?
Right.
What about when it's us? What about when we're the ones falling into that excuse trap? How do we teach ownership to ourselves?
Well, that Teach ownership, it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with us. Like, are we taking responsibility for our own actions?
Really?
Or are we, quick to point fingers when things go wrong? It's about fostering that mindset of, okay, what could I have done differently? Or
Yeah.
what can I learn from this?
Mm-hmm. It's not about beating ourselves up for it. It's about that honest self-reflection and that desire to like actually grow from our mistakes.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's also about, recognizing and celebrating those moments when we do take ownership.
Right.
Those little victories build momentum. They create a positive feedback loop.
It's like we're training our ownership muscles, both individually and as a team.
I love that analogy
Oh, yeah.
because it really highlights that building this culture of ownership, it's a process. It's ongoing. It's not just this one-time fix. It's this continuous effort.
Yeah.
We've got to show up, take responsibility, and support each other's growth along the way.
It's about changing the whole dialogue around challenges and mistakes. Like instead of seeing those as something to be feared or hidden,
Hmm.
we can start to see them as opportunities to actually learn and improve.
Yes.
But hold on a second. Now we're getting into the part of office epidemics that I found the most, I guess, thought-provoking. Because it's not always so black and white, is it?
You're right. Suram actually brings up a really important nuance here, which is the difference between those genuine challenges that we all face and then that habitual excuse making.
Because sometimes, things just go wrong. It's not always a Samir situation. Yeah.
Exactly. And Suram's really clear about that. Like, this isn't about becoming some kind of excuse detective,
Right.
suspicious of every little delay.
Yeah.
The book actually really emphasizes empathy and understanding.
Which I think is so important because we don't want to create this culture where people are like afraid to speak up when they are facing genuine challenges.
Right.
So how do we walk that line? How do we tell the difference between like someone who's really struggling and someone who's just hiding behind excuses all the time?
It's tough. It's definitely more of an art than a science. Suram gives us some good clues, though. Look for the patterns.
Okay.
Is this a one-time thing, or does this happen all the time? What's the context?
So like if someone's normally really reliable, and then suddenly they're missing deadlines left and right, there might be something bigger going on.
Exactly. Life happens.
Yeah.
But if it's the same excuse every single time,
Right.
with no effort to actually fix it or change the pattern, that's when you start to think, okay, maybe this is an Excusenza thing.
It's about the whole picture, not just that one moment.
Yes.
And maybe, like, most importantly, just keeping those lines of communication open.
100%. Instead of assuming the worst, go into the situation, with curiosity.
Hmm.
Check in with your colleague. Maybe they are totally overwhelmed and could actually use some support.
Or maybe just having that conversation where they know you're genuinely trying to understand, that's enough to help them kind of, like, break out of that excuse cycle.
Yeah, it goes right back to creating that culture of ownership that we were talking about.
Right.
It has to be safe for people to be honest, about when they're struggling, without fear of judgment.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like I have, like, a whole new perspective on something that we all deal with at work, whether we're the ones making the excuses or on the receiving end of them.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest takeaway here is that OWNIT framework. And remember, it's not just for dealing with other people.
Right.
It's something we can all use to, like, check our own tendencies, make sure we're holding ourselves accountable, creating that productive, supportive environment.
So true. As soon as one really got me thinking about the power of just owning our choices, big or small. It's like, at the end of the day, are we using reasons to grow or are we using excuses to, like, just stay stuck?
That's a good question for everyone to ask themselves.
Yeah, it really is. So until next time, keep diving deep. And remember, a little self-awareness and a healthy dose of empathy can go a long way. We'll see you all next time.